There is something poetic about things that are short-lived. The morning dew, cherry blossoms, train tickets. Yes, train tickets. Get ready, we're about to talk all about ephemera and the human desire to save things. Hello, and welcome to a new episode of Bite-Sized Book History. I'm Allie Alvis, who you may know better as Book Historia. I'm a book historian and curator of special collections at the Winterthur Library, part of the Winterthur Museum, Garden, and Library, located just outside Wilmington, Delaware. The Winterthur Library isn't just old books and manuscripts. One of its largest categories of material is something called ephemera. If you're familiar with the term ephemeral, you've probably got a good idea of what kind of stuff ephemera is. Material that wasn't made to stick around for a long time. It seems like pretty much every bibliographic term can be traced back to Latin or Greek, and ephemera is no different. It comes from the Greek words epi, which means around, and hemera, which means day. It means, literally, something that's only around for a day. The most common proper definition of ephemera comes from the English ephemera collector and historian John Lewis. He calls it the minor transient documents of everyday life. I also like Anne Garner's definition, material tied together by a tendency to be thrown away. Okay, but what is ephemera in a more literal, physical sense? We're talking about postcards, receipts, tickets, broadsides, trade cards, dance cards, product labels, holiday decorations, pamphlets, gift boxes, advertising fans, greeting cards, scrap, calendars. I could go on. Something else that ties a lot of ephemera together besides its transient nature is that it is A, printed, and B, made of paper. Of course, there are plenty of exceptions to this rule, but print technology and paper as a material were keys in the proliferation of stuff with a shorter shelf life than books. The rise of the printing press in the West didn't just serve to diffuse knowledge in a revolutionary way. It allowed people to advertise their goods, events, and services to much wider audiences, and with much more detail than ever before. And perhaps most importantly, it allowed them to do so cheaply. Manuscripts and early printed books were expensive in both required labor and raw material. By the 17th century, printing presses and the booming European paper-making trade reduced the cost of printed material immensely. It was now feasible to print things like newspapers, which would only be current for around a day or so. There were now different strata of printed matter. The precious, more expensive things to be kept, like books, and the not-so-precious, inexpensive, or free things destined for the trash. It is hardly surprising, then, that a vast amount of ephemera has to do with advertising. Businesses with shifting stock, seasonal sales, and a desire to stay on top of current price trends had a vested interest in printing things quickly and cheaply. Another large chunk of ephemera consisted of literature that was sensational, bawdy, controversial, or otherwise outside social norms. It is important to note that just because ephemera was not necessarily valuable in content or material back when it was created, it can be extremely important to our understanding of history. Ephemera can give us information about what products were for sale when, trends in fashion and communication, how people spent their free time in the past, social concerns, and so much more. But this whole discussion has so far danced around an important point. If ephemera was so often thrown away, why do we have so much of it? Well, if you've ever held on to a ticket to a movie or a brochure for a museum or a ticket to a rock concert, we have people like you to thank for the survival of ephemera. Keeping random bits of paper for nostalgic purposes or otherwise just in case seems to be a human instinct. As soon as this cheap printed material emerged, people started saving it. sometimes by pasting it into blank books. This practice existed alongside of, but eventually became more popular than, the commonplace book. Handwritten copies of things like favorite poetry, recipes, Bible passages, quotes, and jokes. So, think about it. People were using books to keep scraps of paper. That's right, this practice is the origin of scrapbooking. Not everything that wound up in scrapbooks could be universally called ephemera, but ephemera certainly facilitated the rise of the scrapbook. While many scrapbooks have a definitive theme, this one from the Winterthur Library details the experiences of a man who attended the British Great Exhibition in 1851, or this one, which is a record of dresses a mother made for her daughter. Plenty are collections of things people just liked, or thought were nice to look at. Advertisers, of course, were well aware of people's predilection for pictures, and were more than happy to capitalize on it in creative ways. This became easier to do with the advent of chromolithography in the mid-19th century, an inexpensive color printing technique. For more detail on chromolithography, check out the episode before this one. But the short version is that it's a printing process done by layering on different colors with different inked stones. Chromolithography flooded the world of ephemera with vibrant color, and scrapbooks lit up like rainbows. Advertisers even began to print collectible cards specifically for people to use in their scrapbooks, appealing to the gotta-catch-'em-all instinct. Stationers also wanted a piece of the scrapbooking action and produced an incredible array of chromolithographed paper fancies. From flowers to animals to holiday fare and all sorts of strange and wonderful things. These may look like stickers, but people would have to paste them into books using glue. This small inconvenience leads me to a fascinating scrapbook anecdote. Mark Twain was a well-known hobbyist scrapbooker, particularly interested in saving newspaper notices about his own books, lectures, and activities. However, he hated the process of gluing things into scrapbooks. Ever a man of action, he developed and patented a so-called self-pasting scrapbook in 1873. This is an example of a Mark Twain patented scrapbook, partially used by a man named Richard Upjohn. You could moisten these lines of dry glue with a brush or sponge and stick your clippings right in. That does it for this episode of Bite-Sized Book History. If you have any comments or questions or suggestions for future video topics, please be sure to let me know in the comments. And be sure to like and subscribe to stay up to date with my video content. I'll see you next time, and remember, don't bite your books.